Hey there, Mr. Terry, high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, we're back with our friend, the Fat Electrician. He's got another great story, I'm sure, for us. It's called 22 versus 500, America's Defiant Stand at the Lanzerath Ridge. It's been so cool to hear about these very specific stories from history, because I usually get caught up in the big picture stuff. So getting the boots on the ground stories, I think is really great. All right, make sure you watch the original video. It's linked down below. Support the Fat Electrician there. Make sure to get his merch. Let's get started. By the way, I want to let you know that I recently created a Fat Electrician playlist that if you want to see all my commentary videos, they're all collected nicely here, and I'll make sure to keep doing that. I got a lot of response that you guys wanted to do that because you really like him, which is great, and you've liked kind of what I've been able to add to it. So check that out. I'll try to link that down below as well. But if you just go to my channel, go to playlist, you'll see for the series that I cover a lot, I'm making playlists for that. So if there's other series you like that you've watched from me, check those out and you can get them all in one easy to access place. All right, here we go. Hey, can you move?
All right, the most decorated platoon of World War II. Today we're talking about the Battle of Lanzerath Ridge when 22 American soldiers stood their ground against 500 German paratroopers and quite possibly changed the entire outcome of the Second World War, and they didn't even know it. But first, a word from our sponsor.
What we got? Mrs. Electrician?
What's happening right now?
She's hilarious. I love how it's like she gets into the videos now. You just got guns everywhere.
We're not going to use the new couch?
No, the small one's iconic, plus the big one hurts.
Yes.
Anyway, where do you want this thing?
Coffee table.
Will the audience be able to see it?
She's a good actress,
yeah,
too.
I got a thing for that. Look at this.
Dude, really? That new room is decked out. Dude, and he's got like the cool, like, it's all fuzzy, but like the out of focus, but like the bomb there. He's got his 1 million plaque, dude. He's killing it. Dude, he is killing it. That's cool if he's moved on to bigger things. He's done so well. So congrats to him, man. Taking that next step up.
Think about that part.
You're extra.
Love you. Anyways, Delete Me, super straightforward business. You give them money, they turn around and they make sure the data brokers aren't selling your personal information on the internet. So here's how this happens. Pretty much anytime you use a free app or internet service, that app or service isn't actually free. What they're doing is they're harvesting your personal information, then they turn around, they sell it to data brokers, and then the data brokers sell it to anybody that has
I feel like I'm getting hit with that stuff more lately.
They're legally required to stop selling your personal information if you formally ask them to. The problem is there's a bunch of different data brokers and they all have a different process for you to formally request that they quit selling your information. That's where Delete Me comes in. Delete Me monitors all the biggest data brokers for your personal information, and as soon as it comes up for sale, they automatically write in and have them take it down as soon as possible. And then as long as you're subscribed to Delete Me, they will continue to monitor, checking and rechecking for your personal information at these data brokers over and over and over again to make sure if they do ever come in contact with your data again, they have to delete it again. So
remember, if you sign up for a service and it's free, you may be like, oh, they're not selling me a product. That's because there's this famous saying that if that's the case, you're the product. Your info is becoming a product.
If that's something you'd be interested in, I will have a link and a discount code down below. Let's get back to the video.
Okay. Mustache Man's plan.
September 1944. Things are not going well for Germany in World War II at this point. On the east, they have the Soviet Union Red Army closing in, and on the west, they have the Allied forces closing in as well. At this point, the Allied forces have already stormed the beach at Normandy. They've retaken North Africa. They've retaken France and Belgium, and now Allied forces are right up on the German border at the Siegfried Line. Yeah,
this is the time where just the inevitable is there. All right, they got the line. So this is the anti-tank stuff. They're putting up kind of their last stands. You're going to see this in some of these places where you get like Battle of the Bulge and things where Germany's going to try a desperate effort to keep the Western allies from basically crossing into Germany itself. Remember, that's something that was different in World War I. When that line got pushed to the German border, that's essentially the give-up point for Germany. And when they're going to sign their armistice that ended the fighting, they have to do that fighting on German grounds. But it looks like that is inevitable here because they're also saying the Mustache Man does not want to see defeat. He doesn't want to see that. He probably also knows too that very likely be tried for a war criminal, his life's over, right? But also it seems like is holding out for some kind of delusional, I don't know, something to turn the war around, whether it's some wonder weapon or just the will of the German people somehow overcomes every other statistical odd. It's a rough time for Germany here.
It is Germany's last line of defense, their western wall, almost 400 miles of dragon's teeth, tank traps, mines, barbed wire, and it's all covered by over 18,000 concrete reinforced bunkers with artillery and machine guns. And it is the advice of almost every high-ranking German officer that Hitler should order his men to hunker down and defend throughout the winter. But Hitler has a different idea. Hitler wants to do the exact opposite. He wants to go home with the girl that he took to prom, so to speak. Hitler got here by being overtly aggressive. He attacked Poland, and then he launched the Blitz to take over France. He attacked quickly and violently to a degree that nobody had ever seen before, taking everybody off guard. They literally called his tactics the Blitzkrieg, the lightning war, and he wants to do that again. Rather than playing defense and waiting for the enemy.
Well, if you think about it, that's the times where he was successful, when he was able to be offensive, but it's like, it's too late now. The war was going to be over, whether whether D-Day happens or not. The Soviets, although paying incredible prices, are with their lives, are pushing in from the east, making do with the resources that they have themselves, and of course all the stuff that's coming from Lend-Lease. This is delusion time.
He wants to go to the enemy. He wants to launch a major offensive, and the German military only has one left in him. This is an all or nothing strategy, and if he fails, the war is essentially over, but that's not going to deter him. You see, along the Western Front, you have the British and the Canadians in the north, and you have the Americans in the south, and it is Hitler's strategy to launch another Blitzkrieg-style attack right down the middle, splitting the British and the Canadians from the Americans, separating the Allied forces. After splitting the Allied forces, he wants to drive the Canadians and the British to Antwerp, essentially pushing them up against the sea, creating another Dunkirk-type situation, forcing the British and Canadians to surrender, and then he hopes to broker a peace deal with America, because America won't want to be the only Allied force left fighting them.
I mean, it makes sense, like, on paper to do this stuff, but the timeline is all wrong. This would have been potentially more beneficial if this happened like at the very beginning of the war, if the United States had joined, but like, they don't have this in them to do this for a sustained effort.
Assuming
not in 44.
He will no longer have a Western front to defend, and he will be able to divert his entire military to the Eastern Front to combat the Red Army. This is a Hail Mary. This is an all or nothing strategy, and the Germans need everything to go right if they want any chance of success. They need the weather to comply, and they need the element of surprise. Because of this, the entire
didn't the weather, wasn't there, I've learned about this before, wasn't there some kind of crazy weather, something that really messed things up?
A very tight timetable. Once they invade and knock the Allied forces on their heels, they're going to need to keep them on their heels the entire time until they've won. If even a single German unit gets hung up or delayed, it could throw off the timetable, allowing the Allied forces to regain a foothold and launch a successful defense and maybe even a counteroffensive. And that would essentially bring an end to World War II in the European theater, with the Nazis losing. The crazy part about a strategy that's this big and this time sensitive is that it could be just one small contingency of men led by one officer that's willing to fight to the bitter end. They can set about a chain reaction that would bring about the end of the entire Third Reich. And what's even crazier is Hitler would probably never even find out that dude's name.
Yeah. Lyle Bouck.
Lyle Bouck was born on December 17th, 1923 in Fenton, Missouri. He grew up during the Great Depression with 5 siblings. His father was a carpenter, and as I'm sure you can imagine, there wasn't a whole lot of new construction going on during the Great Depression, so he grew up in what many of us would consider to be soul-crushing poverty. Luckily, ignorance is bliss, and young Lyle was just a kid. Whatever he experienced was normal to him. He had no idea that it was irregular for a family that large to live in a one-bedroom home with no electricity and no plumbing. He didn't know that it wasn't normal that nobody was full after dinner, and that all the siblings would go out to eat dandelions and wild berries for dessert. But as he got older, he started to fully understand his family's situation, and by the time he was 14, he wanted to help. So he went...
This is why they called it the greatest generation, that generation that their life was with 3 events, major events: World War I, Great Depression, World War II, and then basically you died thinking the next generation is going to die from a nuclear holocaust with the beginning of the Cold War. How could you not just be like an insane pessimist? By the way, that pessimism is actually going to basically reinvent or come to fruition with the counterculture movement that you're going to see from the other baby boomers and people that come out of that, where they wanted an answer to everything that they've heard about with recent history, which is, you know, love and peace and diplomacy. You're hippies.
and he enlisted in the Missouri National Guard, where he would be able to make $1 a day every time he had drill. In the Army, Lyle's basically a prodigy. He's incredibly intelligent, he's great at everything he does, and he grew up some poor depression kid eating dandelions in his backyard, right? There's nothing the Army can do to him that his childhood hasn't already done, and he deemed his childhood as a good time, so all of this is just fun to him, no matter how much it would suck to anybody else. By the time he's 16 years old, he is the supply sergeant for his entire unit, and in December of 1940, as World War II is starting to heat up, America has not entered the war yet, but it's looking like we're gonna. They're starting to draft people. His entire reserve unit gets activated to go do a bunch of training. So Bouck and his unit are down in Texas and Louisiana. They're training for a full year. They go from December 1940 till December of 1941. Early December rolls around, they're getting ready, they're packing their shit, they're gonna go back home. They've been gone for an entire year. Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, they're not going home. They get told, congratulations, your active duty has been extended indefinitely.
Hey, what's going on? War!
Starship Troopers.
Don't worry though, it gets better. You see, the Army in its infinite wisdom is like, okay, we've got this group of National Guard guys. They've been training for a full year. They're ready to go.
They're going to go right out.
In Texas and Louisiana. They're used to the heat. They're acclimated for the desert and the jungle with extreme humidity. Okay, where should we put them? And the Army's like, the Aleutian Islands, aka fucking Alaska, which is just brilliant. Okay, so Bouck's unit is going to get sent up to the Aleutian Islands because they're concerned that the Japanese are now going to attack the West Coast, and one of the first places they would attack would be the Aleutian Islands, so they're basically going to be there ready to fight the Japanese if they come. So
anyone else get Fallout lore vibes? Where they fight in Alaska, although it was against China?
at this point, Bouck is like, I would rather do literally anything else. So he goes and he volunteers for OCS school, and he volunteers for this new sketchy job called being a paratrooper. And OCS school gets back to him first, which is the officer training course. He gets shipped off to school to become an officer. So Bouck ships off for Fort Benning. He's going to end up being an infantry officer. He goes through the course, graduates top of his class. He does so well, they end up retaining him and not shipping him off to war because they're going to use him as an instructor to train a bunch of more recruits that are coming through. So he actually ends up doing that for
I'd be fine with that.
Fort Benning, training small group defensive tactics for the infantry. So a year goes by, Bouck is 19 years old. He gets orders to go down to Camp Maxey, Texas. He's going to be joining the 99th Infantry Division before they get ready to ship off to combat. He's not really sure where they're shipping off to yet. Nobody knows if they're going to the Pacific Theater or the European Theater, but just judging on the fact that they're in Texas where it's warm and the European Theater is about to go into winter, it would make sense that he was going to the Pacific Theater.
Yeah, you don't think that would play, be the thing that's mostly at play here. By the way, if you knew you were going to get shipped and you were going to, which theater would you rather have gone to? Let me know down below. European theater or Asian theater?
So he's starting to mentally get himself ready for that. So he gets down to Camp Maxey, and at this point in the war, it's like 1943. So most of the younger officers, Bouck's only 19 years old, he's a first lieutenant, and most of the junior officers that are young are all what's called a 90-day wonder, which basically means they pluck some kid out of college, sent him to officer training school for 90 days, and turn him around and sent him into combat to lead men into battle. So being called a 90-day wonder is like a derogatory term. It's definitely not a compliment. It's basically everybody in your chain of command being like, hey, I respect the rank you have on your chest, but also I have zero faith in your ability to do absolutely anything. So
it makes me think of like Band of Brothers and stuff with the David Schwimmer character. You have this guy like that, and then just like demanding respect, and they really didn't trust him. But they did show in that series though, one of the reasons they didn't trust him is because he actually made bad decisions when it came to their training, and why they were like, we are not going to do this if this guy is in charge.
That's kind of what everybody just assumes Bouck is. He's so young. They look at him, 19-year-old kid, first lieutenant on his chest. They're like,
yeah, he's not Alexander the Great.
In reality, Bouck has 5 solid years of experience already at 19 years old. He is one of, if not the most experienced junior officer in the United States Army at this point. His chain of command realizes this, and they give him a more important task. He ends up getting tasked with standing up and creating the INR platoon, the Infantry and Reconnaissance platoon, for the 394th Infantry Regiment of the 99th Infantry.
So be more like a strategic leader.
At this point is what we today would call a scout sniper platoon in the infantry. Basically, they take some of the better or the best infantry guys available from the entire regiment, stick them inside of this platoon, and they learn different tactics because they have a completely different job from the rest of the infantry. Their job's going to be going out behind enemy lines, surveilling the enemy, gathering intelligence, potentially capturing other enemy scouts, things of that nature.
That does seem like maybe a better fit for him, especially at his age, doing something like that than just like being the leader of the front end grunts, just using more of a strategic usage.
Bouck is basically told, hey, here's access to all the personnel files for the entire 99th Infantry Division. Pick your top 18 guys. You got to have 2 squads and 9. So he immediately goes through all the personnel records, starts picking guys out. His criteria is you have to be either a high school graduate or currently going to college. You have to have an IQ of 110 or higher. You have to be a qualified expert marksman with the M1 Grand, and you have to be physically fit. So he goes, he gets like a list of like 50 names, goes around talking to everybody, gets a bunch of volunteers. He ends up having 21 volunteers, but he only needs 18 men.
Best of the best.
He has this little miniature selection process.
Tryouts.
3 of the men fall out. He's got his crew of 18. And from here, Bouck uses the rest of the time he has stateside to train the holy hell out of these 18 guys. Remember, he was an infantry instructor at Fort Benning for a year. This guy knows how to train people, and now he is overly committed to 18 people specifically. He makes them do the hardest obstacle course at Camp Maxey every single morning. By the time they get done with training and get shipped off to war, this group of 18 is an excellent team, and they are in phenomenal shape. And
I was going to say, to be able to do reconnaissance stuff like that, it's going to require a lot of physical activity. You got to get to very specific points that are going to be of strategic value. It can't be at any Joe Schmo. And physically, it's like you got to get up to this remote place up there or somewhere in a efficient fashion and not be able to lose your head. So I want to show that you have mental cognitive abilities that you have demonstrated. So okay, this is all making sense so far. Okay, you can see these guys are primed to be pretty good at their job. Okay.
Then one day they just get told, hey, pack your shit, head to the train yard, you're shipping off to war.
Usually how it
They don't even
goes.
tell these guys where they're going. Now at this point, you got to remember, it's like late 1944. The Allied forces are dominating over in Europe. The German army's on its last leg. They've got the Germans pretty much pushed all the way back into Germany, and they're just manning the Siegfried Line. Okay, so everybody's kind of hoping they're going to Europe, but also everybody kind of already knows they're going to the Pacific Theater. They've had these guys out training in the desert the entire time. It's just obvious they're going to send them over to that tropical environment, and they're going to have to go toe-to-toe with the Japanese, which is horrifying. So they all get to the train yard. Nobody tells them shit.
Doesn't it kind of seem like, maybe because they were talking about like Texas, Louisiana, 2 of the big training places, like somewhere like Louisiana would be better to prepare for like the Japanese, because you have like the marshy, forested kind of conditions rather than like the hot, more arid desert of Texas? Or am I interpreting that wrong?
Don't know where they're going. Everybody's just kind of like, we're going to Japan. We've got to be going to Japan, right? They get in the train. Nobody tells them where they're going. And they're like,
Still
well, fuck
don't.
it. I guess we'll know in a second when the train starts moving east or west, because obviously if we're going to the west, we're going to the Pacific Theater. If we're going to the east, we're going over to Europe. And sure enough, the train starts heading to the East Coast. These boys are headed over to the European theater in winter, despite the fact that they're acclimated to living
Wonder if
in
they
the
like
desert,
that more.
I mean, it makes sense if you don't think about it.
All right, what we got?
So the 99th Infantry Division gets over to Europe. They end up manning the Siegfried Line. The entire Siegfried Line on the Allied side is pretty sparsely defended. They're not anticipating the Germans are going to launch a counteroffensive and attack, so they're just kind of spread out, maintaining the area. They're going to let winter do some of the work for them because it's November in 1944. Let the Germans go in there, freeze their ass off. The Red Army's attacking them.
Like what happened in Russia.
Like, let's just wait a minute and chill is more or less a strategy. So a lot of the infantry guys on that front aren't doing a whole lot other than just securing that front line. But Bouck and the INR platoon are scouts. They're going to be going ahead and they're going to be actually scouting out the Siegfried Line. They're going to be making maps, getting spots of where all the bunkers are, where all the booby traps are, all the minefields, gathering all the intel, and trying to capture German scouts and intelligence along the way. Now,
This is such an important job because, man, having that intelligence, it's that kind of thing. If you're right, it's like the difference in a war. But if you're wrong, you can not only lead to the deaths of countless amount of people, but you can ruin your chances in the war. Like, this stuff is so insanely important. You can see why, again, they were going to such extents to make sure these guys were going to be trained for the job like that, because this could make or break things. They're literally life. This is life and death.
Now, because the INR platoon is going to be sneaking up on the enemy front lines trying to gather reconnaissance, their job is a little bit more dangerous. So Bouck wants to give him and his men the best firepower they can possibly get. So he goes out to the mechanics and the engineers and asks them to make some modifications to the INR platoon's M1 carbines.
Okay, what?
If you don't know, the M1 carbine is semi-automatic and it has a 15-round magazine. So they go and they end up welding 2 magazines together to make a bunch of 30-round magazines, and then they modify the sears inside of the carbines to make them fully automatic. So now the INR platoon is going to be running around the woods in Germany with what amounts to a bunch of submachine guns.
I was going to say, like, what would they want? More like precision type of modifications on their weapon, or again more automatic. It's like to make it more like automatic like that. That sounds like it's for like worst case scenario. Again, these reconnaissance groups are going to be small. They find themselves some kind of trap or overrun. You're going to need something like that. So that's what it seems like, an oh crap, worst case scenario type of weapon.
By December 1944, they're going out, they're doing missions. And one of the first missions,
especially with those Garans,
Private Leopold with them. Now, Private Leopold in the INR platoon is unique because he was actually from Germany. His family fled when the Nazis came to power because they were Jewish. So Private Leopold is extremely valuable because not only does
not
he
an
speak
uncommon
German,
story.
he speaks German in a German accent. It's his native tongue. So he's going to be able to overhear Germans if they get close enough to spy on them, or if they capture one, he's going to be able to interrogate them. It's a very valuable asset to have.
For sure.
The problem is he's Jewish and he's from Germany. If he gets captured by the Nazis, it's pretty much a death sentence right out of the gate.
True.
And he's already being a scout, like the most forward.
Oh no, you have to go in. You have to go in thinking that no matter who you are, it's a death sentence if you're a prisoner of war
unit available, so his chances of being caught are higher than virtually anybody else's. So he's not super keen on going out on missions unless he's feeling like he's at 100%. And on this particular day, he's sick and he's got a really bad cough. So Leopold goes to the chain of command and he's like, hey, I've got this really bad cough. I'm a scout. We're trying to like sneak up on the enemy. Maybe me coughing the entire time isn't
starts
gonna work
coughing.
out that
Yeah.
great. Also, I'd rather not get caught because I'm Jewish. What do you think? Can I sit this mission out? And the chain of command's like, I mean, you speak German, right? You'll cough in a German accent. It'll be fine.
Uh-oh. Don't you hear this?
So Leopold.
I mean, coughing basically sounds like German anyway, so yeah, it's even better.
It's like, fine, okay, I guess. So he goes out on this mission, immediately starts coughing the entire time. Bouck is like, Leopold, shut the fuck up. Start eating snow. So Leopold spends the entire mission just eating snow to calm his throat down so he's not coughing. Ends up working great. This is like their first mission out together, and they come across
We found a cough suppressant
body. At first, they're worried that it's a booby trap, so they sit there, they watch it for a while. There's no movement anywhere around it, so it's probably not an ambush. And then they sneak up on it, and they tie a rope around the ankle of the body, and then get as far away as they can before pulling it like 6 to 8 feet just to make sure it's not booby trapped with like a grenade underneath it or something.
So scary, man.
So they go, they search the body, they find an ID card, they find out
like
what
you hear about that stuff in the Asian theater against the Japanese, but often doesn't come to mind when you're thinking about the European theater, about just the extensive possibility of booby traps, which just sounds like mentally like the hardest thing to deal with when you are, invading somewhere.
unit this guy's from, and they find some other intel on him. This is the first successful mission of the INR platoon. A couple days after that, they go out on another patrol. They end up running into a German patrol, and then they immediately outgun them using their modified M1 carbines, and they end up wiping out the entire German patrol. So things are going great. The INR platoon is performing exactly how they trained to perform. They're going out, they're scouting, they're doing their job, they're getting it done. And what does the military do when things aren't broken? That's right, we fix them anyways. You know what would be cool if the INR platoon, the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon,
their thing.
rather than going out and gathering intelligence and performing reconnaissance, what if we set them up in static fighting positions and ordered them to hold a point like every other infantry company?
Oh, use their skills.
Idea, right?
It's a terrible idea.
So December,
use their skill
Bouck's
set.
training officer rolls up and is like, "Hey, get in the Jeep."
You got plenty
He
of
drives
those
Bouck
guys.
out, and he drives him to this little tiny village of like 15 houses and a cafe called Lanzerath. And Lanzerath has this main road running right through the top of it. Inside of Lanzerath, there's like 50 anti-tank soldiers and then like 4 forward observers, you know, the guys that call in the artillery. And then right on the other side of the town, there's this ridge with a wood line. And the commander's like, "Hey, I want you and your 18 guys to go ahead and hold this ridge on this wood line. We can't lose this town on the off chance that the Germans do attack, because this would be the best route for a bunch of tanks to come storming through." So Bouck and the INR platoon are not excited
That
about
part
this.
makes
This
sense.
is not what they trained to do. It's not really their job. They don't have the training. And when you don't have the training, you get to do the most terrifying thing in the military. You get to wing it, and Bouck is going to do just that.
Oh, great.
So obviously they're about to start stealing shit. Sorry, I mean strategically transferring equipment to an alternate location.
The finest merchandise this side of the River Jordan on sale today. Come on down.
Hey, I have that
And the
shirt.
best way to
Get
go
it.
about that this time is to not actually steal it. It's actually to trade stuff that they've already stolen. I mean, acquired. You see, because the INR platoon
Strategically
was one of the only
acquired.
units actually going out scouting and engaging German scouts,
I should have
they
wore
were
that
also
shirt.
some of the only men on the Western Front at this point in time that had gathered memorabilia, if you will. And let's face it, everybody wants a good souvenir, right? Including supply sergeants. So Bouck gathers up all their memorabilia, goes out to the supply sergeants. He ends up trading it. He ends up getting several Browning automatic rifles, a 30 caliber machine gun, and then he ends up trading some pretty substantial pieces of memorabilia and gets a Jeep that he then convinces the mechanics to weld tank plate armor onto and mount a 50 caliber machine gun on top of.
Dude, did they show Patton? This would make Patton like, oh my gosh, this would blow his mind. This would be amazing for him. He would love this.
And he drives that out to Lanzerath. So the Iron Armor platoon gets all their new equipment. They head out to Lanzerath. There was a unit that was already there that had already dug foxholes, but their foxholes kind of sucked. They weren't very deep. So the Iron Armor platoon gets to work. They dig the foxholes way deeper. They go out in the woods and they cut down a bunch of 4 to 5 inch thick trees. They build it up on top and they cover the foxholes with wood as well. They camouflage the holy hell out of everything. They even dig a foxhole for the Jeep with a ramp to drive down into, so it has its own fortified fighting position. So while that's going on, Bouck goes down into town in Lanzerath. He wants to figure out everything that's going on. He wants to talk with the FOs, talk with the anti-tank guys, just get everything under control and know what's going on, right? He gets there, kind of a giant shit show. They've clearly been here for a while and there's not a whole lot going on. There's a family in town called the Sure family, and they're actually making hot food for all the Americans in exchange for chocolate and cigarettes. Now, the Sure family has already got their 25-year-old daughter sleeping in bed with the parents just so she stays away from all the American soldiers, and all the American soldiers have made her 16-year-old brother Adolf basically their mascot. He now speaks English, but only profanity. So with that, he goes back up to camp.
That whole segment was like the most American thing you could possibly do. Fearing for your daughter, which was totally legitimate, and then having your son just become like, I don't know, a toy.
Camp in his fortified fighting position, and they just kind of wait. They're there just making sure that the Germans don't attack, essentially, freezing their ass off. They've got a little heating shack. They're taking turns, rotating in and out, warming up, sleeping, eating food, and this goes on for a couple of days. By December 13th, this new guy rolls into town, some Belgian guy acting kind of weird, so they, stop him. They talk to him. They're like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm bringing my cousin some shoes. And they're like,
sus.
Right. That's a fucking spy. And they're like debating on what to do with this guy. They can't really do shit with him, so they just end up letting him go. And from there, shit just...
What you do though is you get him and go, okay, I'll take the shoes and I'll give them to him. Okay, leave now.
Gets weird. There's this like one corner of the area that they're overlooking with their fields of fire that they end up calling the creepy corner, because every single night something weird is going on over there, right? There's noises and nobody can see shit and they don't know what's going on over there. And eventually one night they're manning the positions and they hear snow, like freshly frozen snow. You know how when you step on it, it kind of got this big crunch sound as it breaks through. They hear that getting closer and closer and closer, and eventually they just open fire on it because it has to be someone or something coming right at it. And after they open fire, it's just quiet. And that was it for the rest of the night. They can hear some grumbling off in the distance, but nothing else ever came. The next morning they go out and they investigate, and it was a dog that they had ended up shooting, but it was clearly a military trained dog, but it was by itself.
Hey, look at us. Look at us. Huh? Who would have thought? Not me.
So that's weird. And then they adventure further past that, like 150, 200 yards. And then there's like ski tracks all over the place. And they're like, what the fuck is going on? So then the whole day goes by. Everything's seeming kind of normal. A Jeep shows up to resupply them with more food. And this time around, they all got a liquor ration, which is like immediately a red flag. Like they're only giving out liquor rations when they're about to ask us to do some dumb shit or something horrible is about to happen. Okay? It's like getting a steak and lobster dinner. It's going to happen right before somebody's about to die.
That makes sense.
They're not telling us something and we need to figure out what it is. But then somebody's like, hold on, maybe it's not that bad. Lieutenant Bouck actually turns 21 in 2 days on the 17th. So maybe it's so we can all have a party and get LT drunk.
Nah, no, I'm going to go with the more cynical thing here. I was wondering if maybe they've kind of been found out and there's a potential, attack happening.
Then more creepy noises all night long. That morning, a deer walks into camp. Naturally, they shoot it with a machine gun. They end up eating it. Then normal day, seems like, okay? Night of the 15th. More creepy noises all night long. But tonight the noises are different. Off in the distance, it almost sounds like there's engines running. So Lieutenant Bouck knows something's up. So he has all the guys up. They're all alert. They're all there. And then on the day of the 16th at 5:30 a.m., they start getting hit with a ton of artillery fire right on top.
Yep.
At this point, the whole platoon and Lieutenant Bouck are all shitting their pants.
See, it sounds like it's the Germans' reconnaissance here. It's like the stuff that these guys would have been doing if they were actually doing what they're supposed to be doing or tasked to be doing, which for them to do reconnaissance.
I mean, they've had a couple of firefights off in the woods with like 2 or 3 Germans, but this time it's completely different. It feels like they're in the shit. It feels like they're at D-Day taking a ton of artillery fire. The rounds that are getting shot towards them are set to air burst, so they're blowing up in the tree line before they hit the ground, and it's just sending shards of tree splinters everywhere. So the entire INR platoon is just hiding inside their foxholes, and at this point, everybody's pretty fucking happy that Lieutenant Bouck made everybody cut down trees.
By the way, that scene is nuts in Band of Brothers. With that, they were just getting pummeled so hard. It was like, oh, that was so intense.
And put roofs over their foxholes, because now it's going to take a direct hit to take anybody out. The artillery barrage just keeps coming.
I got tree shrapnel.
Coming and more and more. And it gets to the point that like the adrenaline wears off and it just gets tiresome. Like the men are in their foxholes hiding and they're like, okay, you guys are gonna attack us. We get it. Quit launching artillery and just come get us already. But the artillery just keeps coming. Like it feels like it takes an entire day for this artillery to finally stop. Once the artillery fire finally stops, Lieutenant Bouck gets out of his foxhole to assess the situation. He looks down on Lanzerath and realizes all this artillery fire has only been hitting their wood line right on top of them and the one corner of Lanzerath where those 4 forward observers were, which means Belgian shoe guy was definitely a spy that fucked him over.
Yeah.
And right as Bouck is putting that together,
Sorry, Belgians. I'm sorry. We'll never look at you the same way.
anti-tank guys are loading up in their Jeeps and they are peeling off, just straight up leaving. Bouck is obviously kind of pissed off that he didn't give him a heads up. I mean, they ran a phone line out to him, so they had a direct line of communication, but the artillery barrage must have taken it out. In fact, the artillery barrage has taken out all their phone lines, so now all they have is radio. So Bouck radios over to this anti-tank unit and they're like, yeah, we got orders to go over to this next town. That's where we're headed. At which point Bouck is like, okay, well, I can't do anything without you guys. Like, I have a 50 caliber machine gun and some small arms. If they roll up with a tank, we're done. We can't do anything. So Bouck gets on the radio with HQ, tells them the same thing. Hey, the 55 anti-tank guys left. We have nothing that can combat a tank. Do you want us to retreat back to a different position too? What do you want us to do? And Bouck is ordered to hold his position at all costs. Ugh. Right around this time, the 4 forward observers that were down in town come up the hill. They're going to be joining forces with the INR platoon because their position got absolutely pounded by artillery. So it is now Lieutenant Bouck, the INR platoon, and 4 forward observers for a total of 22 men defending Lanzerath and the road running through it. So the forward observers get settled into their new
One of the scary things would be just not knowing what the enemy the enemy is like. When you're in that front area there and you don't have a whole lot of, again, reconnaissance and all the stuff that they should have been tasked to do, but just knowing things like that, like just not knowing what the enemy's doing, how many of them there are, that's got to be so hard to deal with because you don't know what the end is going to be. Do we have the advantage? Do they have the advantage? That's something that's got to be crazy to deal with when it comes to being in war.
Fighting positions, and as soon as that happens, hundreds of German soldiers descend upon Lanzerath. I mean, a shit ton. Luckily, it's very clear that these guys are not moving tactically. They're kind of just moseying through the town. They're not expecting any resistance. They think that the Americans have either been taken out by that artillery barrage or that they all retreated after the fact. But as they start getting closer and closer to the ridge where the INR platoon is, Bouck finally makes out these aren't just German soldiers. These are German paratroopers carrying the new FG-42 assault rifle. Great. So not only are they outnumbered like 50-1, but these are also an elite infantry unit that have fancy new weapons. Perfect.
Also, yeah, giving me the vibes from Band of Brothers 2. It's like the German version of those guys of the company. So yeah, I mean, that's already a dangerous position because they, use the paratroopers there when you need to get right on top of somebody, and usually in very dangerous conditions. Sometimes they use them to, get behind somebody or flank them or something like that. So yeah, this sucks. But you could see though how much Germany was kind of invested in this, of taking such a risk to try to take this area.
In reality, and luckily for Bouck, a lot of these paratroopers were new recruits and weren't quite trained up to the paratrooper standard that the Germans had previously had earlier in the war, but Bouck doesn't know that, and he's still kind of shitting his pants about it. And honestly, it really doesn't matter that much, because even with that being said, it's still 500 to 22. So seeing how vastly outnumbered they are, Lieutenant Bouck is like, okay, it's my turn to call in artillery fire. He hops on the radio, he calls for fire right on top of this massive formation of Germans, and they radio back and tell him, sorry, you're outside of the priority zone. We're taking attack from all over the place, and you're just not a big priority right now, so you're just gonna have to live without it. Now, Bouck doesn't say it over the radio, obviously, but at this point, he's just kind of like, so let me get this straight. I need to hold this ground at all costs because it's of vital importance, but it's also not vitally important enough for you to throw some artillery fire my way to help me out in my 22 to 500 battle. Okay, great, perfect. You know what? I still have the element of surprise, so I've got that going for me at the very least.
Again, shows with Germany, this was their big push. This was their last stand, I guess you could say, last type of thing where they could actually do something offensive. It's like they're pinning the whole war on this late attack. It's like, this is what's going to win or lose it for them.
And as soon as he has that thought, he sets the radio down, and one of his INR platoon guys goes, sir, you might want to look at this. He turns, looks down at Lanzerath, and there's a German officer talking to a young blonde girl, and the young blonde girl is pointing directly at them, at which point Bouck is like, fuck. And then immediately all the Germans scatter and
we've been found out.
So now he has nothing, and it's just straight up 22 to 500.
Yep, screwed.
I think we're about fixing to get into a pretty good gunfight.
Moments later, the Germans just bum rush the hill that the INR platoon are on top of. About midway up this hill, there's this barbed wire fence. They didn't put it up, it'd been there forever, but none of the Germans even make it there. The INR platoon is just picking them off one by one. Remember, every single one of them is an expert marksman.
That's
and
right.
These guys are just out in the open, running up a hill. They don't stand a chance.
They're elite, man. They're elite.
The Germans back, obviously. They fall back, they regroup. Bouck is going from foxhole to foxhole, redistributing ammunition, checking on all of his guys. Everybody's okay. They've repelled the first wave of the Germans. They're probably going to get flanked now. There's nobody out there. If they get flanked, they're screwed. At this point, it feels like they've been awake for 3 days, but in reality, it's only like 9 o'clock in the morning. And like I said, they're just sitting there waiting for this flank to come. They're just going to fight till the bitter end. That's all they can really do. And they sit there and they wait and they wait, and minutes turn into hours. And then the Germans launch another attack at 11 a.m., but they're not flanking them. They're using the same strategy. They're just running up the hill, trying to run through machine gun fire like it's World War I.
Yeah,
at this point, Bouck is like, well, this
yeah, didn't we learn from that doesn't work anymore? There were so many senseless deaths in World War I by the millions because of really stupid ideas back then of not understanding what technology is like in the 20th century.
Fantastic news. Finally, somebody's given me and the INR platoon a break, and it turns out it's the enemy. So they mow them down again, push them back again. Shortly after that, a couple of Germans approach under a white flag. Bouck goes up there to meet them. The Germans just want to be able to scoop up some of their dead and wounded off the side of this ridge. And Bouck is like, sure, go ahead. You do that. We won't fire on you. Go ahead, get your guys. Bouck retreats, hoping that when he's captured, they're going to extend him the same goodwill. So the medics come out, they scoop up all the medics under the hill. The INR platoon lets them do it, just as Bouck said they would. Everything's fine and dandy, and Bouck is kind of thinking to himself, like, all right, I have the high ground. I have fortified machine gun positions. They've figured it out after the first 2 runs. They're definitely not going to try a full frontal assault where I have the high ground again.
Don't try it! High ground!
But the German stormtroopers,
but the Germans go, hold mine beer.
the paratroopers are like,
you underestimate my power.
At 1 p.m., they launch a full frontal assault for a 3rd time. And predictably so, they got the exact same results they got the first 2 times. The INR platoon guys
they got enough ammo though, huh?
Play pigeons at the state fair.
Whoops, I'm gonna grab that. High ground. Wait, are you robbing me?
Then the same thing happens. The Germans fall back.
Robot
they
chicken.
regroup. 3 p.m. They launch another full frontal attack. They get repelled again, except during this attack, they sent out so many men that the 50 caliber machine gun actually got burnt up because they were having to run it so hard to mow down so many Germans. In addition to that, they're also out of ammunition for the BARs, and Bouck's radio got shot in the middle of this firefight, so now they have no communication whatsoever. So now Bouck's making all the decisions. They've held this position longer than anybody could have ever expected them to. It's time to get the fuck out of here. So he goes, they sabotage all the Jeeps, and as soon as it gets dark out, they're gonna slip away into the forest at night and make their way back to headquarters on foot. Now, that sounds a little bit crazy, like why wouldn't you want to drive? But in reality, there's probably Germans all over the road, and this is the INR platoon. That's their whole MO, is sneaking around in the woods and going unnoticed. This is their best shot at getting out of this. So they sabotage the Jeeps, they get ready to step off, and right at dusk as they're about to leave, the Germans attack them from their flank. They get into a firefight, but the INR platoon runs completely out of ammunition and they get overrun by the Germans. And eventually the Germans just roll up to the foxholes and they yell down, "You can come out or we're gonna send a grenade in." So foxhole by foxhole, the entire INR platoon surrenders. And as they come out, they're all shot up, blown up. They're all hit with shrapnel, gunshot wounds. Bouck took a bullet to the leg. Nobody's doing that great. But with the exception of one forward observer by the name of Billy Queen, they're all still alive, which is pretty incredible for a 22 to 500 firefight. So the Germans get the entire INR platoon and the 3 remaining FOs all lined up, and it becomes very apparent that the Germans are gonna kill them. They're standing there with a machine gun, and right as this guy is about to let fire with this machine gun, a German officer comes running up the hill screaming, and next thing they know, the entire INR platoon is getting escorted down this hill into Lanzerath. Next thing
I want to know if him showing some compassion to the Germans, letting them pick up their dead, you know, on the ridge there, is going to pay off now. So,
You know, they're all getting funneled into the cafe in Lanzerath. The Germans are digging through their pockets. They're confiscating anything that's good. And the Germans confiscate all the cigarettes. And as they take all the cigarettes, they walk around and give the Americans one last cigarette. Like, okay, maybe they are still going to kill us. I have no idea what's going on. Either way, now they're all just sitting in the cafe, having their last cigarette, blown up, bleeding with bullet holes in them. And it's just dead quiet. Bouck said the loudest thing in that room was the second hand on the cuckoo clock in the corner. And it was ungodly loud. It was so quiet that in between the noises of the second hand on that cuckoo clock, Bouck could actually hear the Germans, the superior master race, across town in their aid station screaming from their injuries. Meanwhile, him and all of his men are just sitting in the cafe, dead quiet, stone face, having a cigarette. It's like the biggest cool guy moment ever. So the INR platoon finishes their last cigarette.
It's like, oh, not so superior now, you big wimps. Look at, we're just stoic and chilling here.
And then they just sit there and they sit there and they sit there and they sit there. And then eventually Bouck is just trying to think to himself over that annoying ass cuckoo clock in the corner. And he just
like how he's playing in the background.
He's not happy with how things went, right? He spent 6 years of his life training for this, and he goes into combat, and the first time he really goes into combat, he gets the best guys that the 99th Infantry had to offer. They let him pick the best of the best, and he took them into battle, and in one day, he got all of them captured and most likely killed, and it's all on him. Or at least that's how he felt at the time. And
yeah, I mean, remember, that's not what they were supposed to be doing. They never got a chance to do the thing that they were experts on. It was like, here, go do this thing that we could let anybody do. Oh, and you're going to be under supported.
He just continues to sit there for hours, just loathing himself in the silence and the noise of that fucking cuckoo clock in the corner that just keeps ticking and ticking and ticking. And he's just sitting there and he's sitting there, and then the fucking bird comes out again and honks, and it's 10 p.m. And suddenly he has this memory of when he was 14 years old, and his Aunt Mildred, who used to read palms, she read his palm when he was 14, and she told him that if he lived to be 21, he'd have a long, happy life. And he's about 2 hours away from turning 21.
Fortune teller.
He can't believe that this is the dumb shit that he's thinking about, but that's what he's thinking about. So he sits there and he waits, and more time passes.
The omen.
More time passes, and sure enough,
the prophecy
midnight hits, and suddenly he just feels this relief, like, can't get me now. I'm gonna make it. And not
yeah. Because if anyone knows truth, it's my weird witch aunt that like believes in magic and weird, supernatural fortune telling.
A minute later, some high-ranking German officer comes storming into the cafe, yelling at all the other Germans. This guy's not like all the other German military guys around here. He's not standard German military. This guy's SS. He's dressed from head to toe in leather. He's got the German dead skull on his hat. He's got the Knight's Iron Cross around his neck, the second highest award for valor in the German military.
Yeah. So what he's going to get to, if you are the enemy, if you're being captured, that is the last group of people you want to see. These are the guys that are going to have no empathy. They're the SS. They're like oh my God, without using demonetization words, like it's not the group you want to see. you're not going to see those guys and think, okay, we're okay now. We're going to be safe. They're going to be lenient. It's the exact opposite.
This dude is super important, and he is super fucking pissed off right now. Now, Bouck doesn't know it at the time, but this SS officer is yelling at all these other German officers like, why are you guys stopped? Why aren't you continuing to advance? We're on a very strict timetable. What the fuck is going on? So these German officers explain to this SS guy like, hey, there's a massive American army in this wood line. They've got tanks, they've got machine guns. We're not going to go fight them at night. They've been fucking us up all day long.
Remember, it is important to disassociate a lot of your run-of-the-mill German military people and then like the SS. Okay, a lot of the SS guys, these are guys that followed along with the ideology of the no Germans. They're there like by choice. They've got to that position because of their ideology. Anybody could just be in the German military. It didn't matter what your beliefs were. Maybe you were down with the no policies. Maybe you weren't. This is like the German army. They're not the no army, okay? I think it is important to understand the difference. SS is very different.
We finally captured
those are truly the bad guys when you look at this.
Their forward scout element. So they wait until there's enough light to actually go outside. Like 4 a.m., the Germans send out a bunch of scouts into the wood line. They don't find anything because there's nothing there to find, and they have to come to the realization that 22 dudes with small arms have been fucking them up for the past 22 hours, and they're all incredibly embarrassed. So the Germans take off, hightailing it down this road, half tracks, tanks, and then Lyle Bouck and the rest of the INR platoon are all getting sent to POW camps. Unfortunately, because Bouck is an officer, he's going to get separated from the rest of the guys, and they're going to separate POW camps. From here, you guys know the drill. POW
Standard practice.
Camp is absolutely horrible, the worst possible thing to have to live through. He's starved to death. There's diseases, living in close proximity with other sick people. And as the war progresses, at one point, there is actually a prison break. He ends up getting recaptured, stuck back into a POW camp. And as
that's going to be worse.
Continues to progress, for some reason, they keep moving him from POW camp to POW camp. And he doesn't know it at the time, but what's actually happening is the Germans are losing the war, and all the German POW camps on the eastern half of Europe are starting to move all their POWs and themselves to the western side, because if these Germans are going to have to surrender to an allied force, they absolutely want to surrender to the Americans, the British, and the Canadians, because if they surrender to them, it's a court date, and if they surrender to the Red Army, it's going to be an execution.
Yep. Yeah, I've heard stories about that of, German soldiers and people being like, hey, like telling civilians and stuff. It's why there was this mass migration of millions of people in East Germany to the West, because you heard from these German soldiers that are like, you do not want to surrender to the Soviets. They don't do anything judicial with that. And I think they were even saying stuff like, hey, if they do the stuff that we were doing to them, you want to get out of here. It's not what you want to do. Even like Soviet soldiers, like the front line guys, the guys that are like the elite soldiers, were even telling German civilians like, move to the West, because the people coming behind us, right, the other Soviet ones, the ones that are the grunt troops that Stalin has been forcing out there, and what is it said that he would like open up prisons or whatever and just like send all the convicts to the front line. He's like, those guys are wild. You do not want to be around when those guys show up.
His final POW camp is in Moosburg, and while he's there, a bunch of SS teenagers, like radicalized 16, 17, 18-year-olds with submachine guns that have German officer rank, roll into this POW camp, and they want to execute all the POWs, including Bouck.
All the German edgelords.
The German army, the Wehrmacht, are like, no,
the brainwashed.
You're not executing all the prisoners. Those are our bargaining chips to turn over to the Allies so we don't get killed. So
that's it, by the way. If you wonder, like, why would you ever take prisoners and go to the effort of keeping them alive, and that prisoners are currency in war. You need them, because if you have you're going to have some capture on the other ends. It can be used for negotiations. It's like, it's important and beneficial to have prisoners.
So absolutely not. And there's this huge fight between the SS and the Wehrmacht, which became more and more common as the war progressed. And ultimately, the Wehrmacht won that argument, and they ended up keeping everybody alive.
Well, they're the ones that do stuff.
Got pretty lucky on that one.
They're the ones it's the Wehrmacht that have the leverage. They're the ones that are like, hey, SS, we're the ones that are actually doing your stupid bidding, and now we're paying for it, all your stupid decisions. And so, all right, Revelations.
From there, Lyle Bouck remains at that POW camp till the end of World War II. When he is finally released, he weighs 114 pounds and has contracted hepatitis. He is essentially on his deathbed, and he spends months in the hospital. Thankfully, Lyle Bouck does end up recovering. He makes it back home, and from there, he's like, what, 22 at this point? So he's trying to figure out what he wants to do with the rest of his life.
Seen a lot, man.
I've already dedicated so much of my
hard
time
22.
to being in the military. Maybe I should just go back and be full-time Army, and he's considering doing that. And then the paperwork comes through, and the Army fucked him over on his back pay and his leave that he had accrued while he was a POW, and he, challenged him on it.
That's
He's like, hey, you did
bull
my back pay wrong.
crap.
You paid me out as a supply NCO when I was actually a officer in the infantry
Oh, no.
in combat the entire time and serving as a POW. I'd like to be paid as an officer, not as an NCO.
Yeah.
And the Army is like, don't care, fuck off. So he's like furious, like the Army has done nothing but treat this guy poorly, right? Like couldn't get artillery fire when he needed it, can't get back pay, and he's just like, screw this, I'm done with the Army. I don't want anything to do with it anymore. Understandably so from his point of view.
I have a question for you guys. Like, you hear about, a lot of these guys are ex-soldiers that end up staying in the Army after they fought, and all the trauma that comes from that, and PTSD, I would assume that you suffer just routinely. Those guys that like end up staying in the military, do you ever wonder why? Is it because they don't just see, like, they see this as their best fit for an actual like career? They don't see other job opportunities or feel like they could, do that? You wonder about that, from people that went through that like, again, it would just be like nothing but PTSD if you're just serving in the military. I don't know. What do you guys think about that perspective of remaining in it?
From there, he kind of hangs around town, meets his high school sweetheart, Lucy, ends up marrying her, trying to decide what he wants to do for a career. And one of the things that helped him recover from all his injuries from the war was actually a chiropractor. So that inspires him to go off and become a chiropractor himself. And from there, he just kind of gets to live happily ever after, just like his Aunt Mildred predicted when she read his palm. For 20 years, he never talked about what he did during World War II. Why would he? He thought he was a failure. He thought that he got given the chance to assemble the best men the 99th Infantry Division had to offer, and he led them into battle and got them captured and served out the majority of his time in theater as a prisoner of war. It was nothing to brag about.
Had he said, because he said the group got separated, or at least he got separated from the group. Do we know what happened to the rest of those 22 guys?
At least that's how he felt. So he never really talked about it. And then one day in 1965, he got a letter from one of his men. After 20 years, the United States government was finally putting out extensive volumes of what happened during World War II. And one of the volumes was dedicated to this major German offensive in 1944, December 16th, 1944 specifically, called the Battle of the Bulge. Adolf Hitler had ordered a massive Blitzkrieg-style offensive where they were going to split the American and British forces in half by seizing Antwerp, cutting off the
stuff you don't know in the moment,
the British and the Canadians, and forcing the Americans to sign a peace treaty. In order for this plan to have any success, it was critical that they had the element of surprise, and because of that, German high command in the days leading up to the Battle of the Bulge offensive ordered that none of the German scouts were to go out without a German scout dog that was specifically trained to lead the scouts by 100 yards. That way, none of them got caught, because if a single scout got caught and got interrogated and gave away this battle strategy, it would ruin the entire thing. That's the dog that they shot on December 13th. And that also explains all the ski marks and everything else hundreds of yards behind the dog. The artillery barrage that they survived before the
God, that would be nuts to find out, afterwards, because like you know so little in the moment of what's going on, and then like the Battle of the Bulge is so infamous, and it was at such large scale that you start, like he's seeing here, it's all the way to the 60s, he was saying, when they fully start writing, I guess, the history of World War II, and you find out, how big this was. And then you, I guess, get to see yourself as like, you were in a truly historical moment. And, in this scenario, like you were a key part of it.
Troopers attacked. That was the largest artillery barrage of World War II, with over 1,600 artillery pieces firing on the American.
Get to find that out? You saw the worst of it.
That pissed off SS officer that showed up at the cafe at midnight.
What happened?
That was Joachim Peiper, the commander of the 1st Panzer Division. The 1st Panzer Division was the lead element of the 6th Panzer Army, which at this point in time was Germany's premier armored unit that was hand-selected by Hitler himself to have the most important role of the entire military operation. The 6th Panzer.
So he's found out that he was in this the biggest mission the Germans had organized in the entire Western Front and how this large scale was, he personally saw the biggest artillery attack that anybody could have done and was face to face with the elite force on the Western Front. Like that's crazy. And because again, you'd be wondering, like, is this what everybody experiences? Is this like, again, the hard stuff? Is this like an easy experience? And I don't know if that would make you more validated or feel luckier or whatever it is that, yeah, you actually saw the worst of what could have been possible.
Panzer Army being comprised of almost 5,000 men and 600 vehicles, tanks,
yeah, then you find out the numbers.
Half-tracks, was supposed to be the first element to cross the River Meuse and head straight to Antwerp to cut the Allied forces in half. They were the spearhead of this entire offensive, and Johann Piper's 1st Panzer Division was the tip of that spear. And the reason he was so pissed off that night was because the paratroopers getting stopped by the INR platoon created a traffic jam behind them that he was stuck in, and he was 18 hours behind schedule. This German attack was so hasty, they weren't going to be able to rely on their own supply lines. They had to rely on capturing Allied supplies to be able to continue this attack, including fuel. And since they were 18 hours behind schedule, the Allies were able to adopt new defensive positions, not leave any supplies behind, and the entire 1st Panzer Division would run out of fuel. The weather would break, Allied planes would take the sky, they would attack, and the entire 1st Panzer Division would never cross the River Meuse. The INR platoon and 4 forward observers
get obliterated.
quite literally blunted the spear of the entire German offensive. 22 men stood in the pocket and stuffed the largest blitz the world has ever seen at the line of scrimmage. These 22 men may be
they're at the point of the tip of the spear,
responsible for changing the entire outcome of World War II. And at this point in time, nobody really knew anything about it. Some of the military historians knew that something happened over there, but nobody knew what happened. And it's because Bouck and all of his men got captured after the war. There were no after action reports. They never got around to filling out all those papers. They just got sent to the hospital, got patched up, and got sent home. Nobody knew what actually happened. So Bouck, 20 years after the fact, writes into his old commanding officer, and then a couple of months later, he never hears anything back, but a silver star just shows up in the mail, only for him. And it's not really what he's looking for.
No ceremony?
The rest of his men probably feel the same way he did. They trained just as hard as he did. They went out, they got the same fight, and they ended up getting caught too. They probably feel just like he does, and he wants to make sure that he gets them the recognition. He wants to be the good leader to his men that he never had. For years, he writes letters and petitions and does interviews and talks to journalists about what his men did that day. And for years, nothing really happens. And years turned into decades. And after 2 more decades, he finally breaks through. And in 1981, his men get the recognition they deserve. The INR platoon would retroactively be awarded 4 Distinguished Service Crosses,
what's up, y'all?
5
Heroes,
Silver
baby.
Stars, and 10 Bronze Stars with V device.
Let's go. Oh, they're all freaking kids.
Will be awarded the president.
They're kids, man. I tell my students this all the time when we talk about war. I'm like, these people that are doing this stuff that you think of, whether it's heroic or awful or whatever it is, they're you. They're no different than you, right? Like, and maybe lead that to say, like, look how blessed you are to be able to live the life that you are. Stop complaining about bull crap in your life. Look at what these people were going through and had to go through. They had no choice.
Unit citation. If you don't know, a presidential unit citation is the highest award a unit can receive, and it's usually given out to companies or battalions for major battles or something huge. It's very strange for an element as small as a platoon to be given this award. In fact, they were the only platoon of World War II to be given the presidential unit citation. And with that, they became the most decorated platoon of World War II. Thank you for watching.
Go.
The best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over at
jacket was sick.
FatElectrician.com. Quack bang out.
Final thoughts. All right, I feel like this is one of those videos I didn't add as much to, which usually makes me feel bad to do that it's just like re-uploading things. But I was learning so much from this that this was just a story I had no idea about. I mean, I knew about the greater Battle of the Bulge, but to hear these stories that Fat Electrician talks about, it's so great. I'm so thankful for him that he's so supportive of me doing this, where I feel like compared to so much of the other content I review, I add so much more to it and really give my perspective. But in like this, like a video like this, it's like I'm being taught, and hopefully you guys find value. So thank you for Fat Electrician of letting me do this in the fashion that I do and being so cool with it. So, all right. Well, yeah, again, crazy story, incredible story to hear there, and amazing kind of experience that these young kids, I feel like, had to go through. So, all right. Thank you all for watching. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.